Great.
I opened up by saying that you were blocked and unblocked by Kim Cattrall on Twitter. I want you to walk me through this. Do we know why she initially blocked you?
Yes. So it was I believe it was 2017. And this was at the height of the conversations around Sex and the City 3. So I had this thing for a long time that I used to just message Kim Cattrall, or not message, I would at her on Twitter with just random thoughts, and she would often respond.
Give me an example of one of those thoughts.
Yes. So she mentioned the fact that she had spent a Sunday doing acrobats. She like went to an acrobatic facility or whatever. And I told her, I hope you're having a great day, Kim. And she'd respond. I was like, I think I started by saying, I hope you're having a great day, Kim. And she responded by telling me that she was with the acrobats. Just mindless stuff like that made me so happy. And then I think I asked about Sex and the City 3. I think it was a fraught topic, as we now know why. And she blocked me. And then the unblocking was like 2020, she realized she unblocked me in 2020. I don't quite know when she blocked me. And then I was blocked on Instagram for a period, and I'm now unblocked. It's funny that we're having this conversation right now because she just I waved at her yesterday on Twitter again, just because like sometimes I go on and like I'm in the mood to interact with Kim, and she liked my wave, which was significant. Doesn't check her Instagram DMs, but it's funny. I often think like, what is the dream guest for Shut Up Evan? And it's like, without question, it is Kim Cattrall. And honestly, I would be happy to do the interview with no conversation about, the SJ of it all. I think that there's many aspects of Kim that I'm interested in that have nothing to do with Sex and the City. So,
but how did you get her to unblock? Like once you're blocked, you're in jail. How did you get her to unblock you?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I don't know, but it's funny because to prove that I'm not making this up, because it's such a bizarre story, she posted something about Joe Biden in 2020, and I responded to it being like, yay or something, and she responded being like, you're unblocked, ? As though she didn't realize she'd unblocked me. So yeah, again, I have no level of awareness around like what Kim actually, like, does Kim even know what the block button is? Does she actively deploy it? Is Kim running her own social media? There are so many questions that deserve their own deep dive. All I know now is that I am unblocked and happy.
I love this for you. I love this, and I want her on Shut Up Evan. I feel like you could do a whole thing not even mentioning Sex and the City.
I concur. I mean, I often think that some of my favorite interviews with famous people that are often regarded for a singular thing are entire interview. For instance, I recently had Jonathan Groff on the podcast, and I was like, we're not going to talk about Frozen or Hamilton, because I was just like, they've been asked every single question about these legacy projects. So there's something refreshing about being like, let's move past it for your sake and mine, and if people want to know about Kim Cattrall talking about Sex and the City, there are decades of interviews. That's how I feel about it. Now, that said, I mean, like, could I do a 10-hour interview with her about Sex and the City?
Course.
Yes. And I hope, but honestly, I'm hopeful that we'll get the memoir one day. And I'm hopeful that time heals wounds, not between her and I, the wounds between her and her cast.
While we're on the subject of booking people on your show, and we're going to get back to And Just Like That in just a second. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of your podcast. Now, so Jennifer Coolidge opened the new season of your show. You had a phenomenal interview with her. Is it true the way you made contact with her was just through a measly DM on Instagram, simply saying, hey, legend, do you check your DMs?
Yes, that is true. Although I had a little bit of a jumping of the line in that I believe it was our mutual friend, Darcy Carden, who was filming a movie with Coolidge and told Coolidge to follow me. And so I had the Coolidge follow already. So it wasn't exactly like a blind DM per se. But yes, I do that often. And typically someone like Coolidge does not check their DMs. But Coolidge does check her DMs. And then that began the friendship. And then now it's a friendship. That began the contact. And then I kind of just like do what I always do. And I kind of just like shoot my shot at some point. And it was just like, hey, I've got this podcast. And then we kind of took it from there. And then, DM became email, email became text, text became phone calls. And here we are now.
So you interviewed her, and what happened? She wanted like a do-over, so you literally had to redo the interview. Why wasn't she happy with the first 2-hour interview you did?
Well, that is like a 2-hour conversation unto itself. But what I'll say is that I think that the Jennifer Coolidge that I think a lot of people know and love, I think there's a level, like there's a veneer to it. I mean, I think about her recent appearance on like Jimmy Fallon, and it's like she's on. It's kind of like Lady Gaga talked about this in one of her Vogue videos where she was like, she was asked the question, do you ever feel the pressure to be on? And she responded by saying, I don't know what it means to be on, but like that answer alone was very telling. But anyway, I think that celebrities like Coolidge and many others, there is that pressure to be on. And I think that the original interview with Coolidge, she was not on in the way that she's accustomed to being on. And I think that made her have reservations about showing people that side of her. She would tell you that the original interview was very boring. I do not share that opinion. And yeah, I gave her the opportunity to listen to it. She wasn't happy. And so we agreed to re-record.
Wow. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
You're a trooper for that. I mean, that's like exhausting.
It was exhausting, but the thing is, it's like, I love her so much. And it gave me the opportunity to take, because it was in person, and it gave me the opportunity to see her again. So as frustrated as I was, it was more like frustration with the situation and never with her.
One of my favorite parts, actually, just a tiny little anecdote. One of my favorite parts of that interview was when she was talking about her New Orleans home. I know she has a place in the Lower Garden District. I am currently, as we are recording this, I'm spending the winter in New Orleans. I've been here since January 1st. And for a period of time, I had an Airbnb in the Lower Garden District. And then I looked up the whole, like, I don't know if it was Architectural Digest. It was some piece on her home. And I just love, there are so many artists and celebrities, musicians who live here.
There's something about I was going to say a famous person, but it's not even a famous person. There's something about a person who is in an industry that sort of gravitates them towards New York and LA and chooses to make their home base be elsewhere, that I am very endeared to, because I think there's just some, even if it's like upstate New York. I know like Mark Ruffalo, for instance, I believe like he and his wife have a house in like Narrowsburg, New York, which is a town upstate that I really, really love. But just that decision to not make the quote unquote center of the world, not make the quote unquote center of the world your center of world, to me, I find really, I mean, admirable is the wrong word, because it's okay if that's for you, but I guess it resonates for me, the idea of like being somewhere else. And she has really just like the work that she has put into making that house. Yeah, but like not even just a home, like the way she's the effort to preserve the historic nature of that home, that effort to me is so admirable. And it's like, I often think about just like, what do we spend our time doing, right? Like in this life. And it's like, I just think to spend part of your life restoring a home in this historic, back to its historic roots, I think that is like, it's just such a great way to spend one's time. So I admire that quality in her.
Can we talk about how Miranda's love interest on And Just Like That was initially supposed to be Dr. Nia Wallace, and Cynthia Nixon thought it would be a better idea for her to be with, rather than two straight people sort of why not just make Nia Wallace queer? Like, why did she have to be straight?
I was just gonna say that. It's so funny hearing them talk about this show and the what could have been, and then sort of act like, well, we made this decision because we didn't want to make this decision. And it's like, it's not so binary. Like, it's like, I get it. You didn't want to make it be two, as you said, two straight women getting together. Easy fix. Make the new character, the one we haven't met, queer. Like, yeah. But yes, I too read that and watched the documentary, and it answered some questions, and then it created more questions. But I appreciated the tone of the documentary and getting to see Molly Rogers be Molly Rogers. Yeah. For
Yeah.
people that don't know, Molly Rogers is the co-costume designer of And Just Like That.
Yeah. And she was Pat Field's number 2 for all 6 seasons and the movies, yada, yada.
Exactly.
Now, your personal relationship with And Just Like That and the Sex and the City universe, were you personally invited by SJP to the premiere in response to your writing about the passing of Willie Garson?
Yes. So I am friends with someone that's related to SJ that I've been friends with for some time. And that person showed SJ my post, and then I had heard directly from her, and we had a little bit, limited interaction. I mean, she's got a lot going on. I don't want to like take her ear for too long. And then, yes, by the grace of I was gonna say by the grace of the gods, but I mean, really by the grace of SJ, but SJ is a god. So, but yes, I don't know why. I don't know how. I mean, I do know how. I don't know why. But yes, she invited me and a plus one, my boyfriend, to go and be her guest at the premiere. And I mean, amazing for all the obvious reasons, but also it was a COVID premiere, so it was an especially small group. I mean, I would honestly say we were amongst 10 non-famous people that were there. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like I was at the bar at one point, and what's her name? Christy. But I was just having a Cosmo with this famous 90s supermodel, which you would think is Christy Turlington, but it's not. It's a different Christy. Anyway, but
not my area of expertise.
Fair, apparently not mine. But yeah, it was so lovely. She was lovely, and then went to the after party, got to chat with her and her family, and she is I would say my takeaway from her, besides being nice, because I think a lot of people are nice, I appreciate her protectiveness around her non-famous self. I feel like some celebrities, and this isn't a read, some celebrities exist in a world in which they are always a famous person. Mm-hmm. And I got the distinct feeling from SJ, again, spent limited time with her, but that like she enjoys the human aspects of life versus the celebrity aspects. And I found that really poignant.
So cut to last week, the one-on-one with SJP at Watch What Happens Live. You were in the audience where she admits in front of God and everybody that those 2 episodes that they screened at the premiere are the only episodes of And Just Like That she has seen. She's only seen 2 out of the 10. Now, there's been a lot of discourse about this. Yes, she doesn't like to watch herself. Fine. Although in watching that documentary, it's quite clear she's seen Sex and the City over and over. She's like an anthropologist about Sex and the City. So there's that. So fine, she doesn't like to watch herself. And yes, she immediately had to run off and film Hocus Pocus 2. So much so that she didn't even have time to do press until after the show was already wrapped. However, she is the reason that this show got back on the air. She is co-executive producer with Michael Patrick King. I find it hard to believe that she didn't see a cut. She didn't see an edit. And then in the interview, Andy asks her the question that he's asked all of the women that have come on Watch What Happens Live. Do you think Che Diaz is funny? And she responds, she sort of doesn't answer and then says, well, we've talked about this in private.
Well, first of all, I believe what she says is Bible. So if she says she's not seen episodes 3 through 10, I believe her. I find that incredibly odd. But crazier things have been espoused and crazier facts are written. So, and uttered. So yeah. And then as far as the Che of it all and whether or not SJ was like privy to it, my sense would be that SJ is aware because of people like Andy and people that are a little bit more like have their, boots on the ground or ears to the ground rather, when it comes to the cultural conversations. I imagine people like Andy have brought it forward to her. I could imagine someone like Andy texting her tweet or something that's going viral about Che, or like one of the fabulous posts from like Every Outfit or something. So yeah, I can see a world in which she's not attuned to like the conversation, but like gets snippets of it from people. So that was what I sensed from that. But as far as like the not seeing
Like
the final,
Michael Patrick King at no point like pulls her into, like, there were months of edits, and I mean, actually not really, actually. I know they filmed this down to the wire, and this was like a rapid turnaround. I just think it's crazy. I mean, I believe it, but it is nuts to me.
I think that everything about And Just Like That is nuts. I mean, from when you think about it, from the announcement to pre-production to the writer's room to production to the premiere to the finale, everything happened in a year. And even if you're not someone that's in TV production, I am not. I know that to be a very quick turn. And then, as you mentioned, SJ is filming Hocus Pocus 2 during the filming of And Just Like That. And then I imagine Cynthia was also filming The Gilded Age. And so you have these schedules that just don't seem to allow for this. And given that there's no reason why the show is coming out when it's coming out. You know, for instance, we're talking about my Buffy book earlier. There's a date, right? A 25th anniversary. There's nothing like that tied to Sex and the City or And Just Like That by way of like, oh, it's some sort of anniversary. That doesn't exist. So why we couldn't wait longer to make the show happen at a time when everyone's schedules. And then also on top of that, they began production, you know, I don't know the height of COVID, but like COVID was still, we still weren't sure like what the future was of the entertainment industry at that time. And yet they rushed this into production. There's just so many question marks that remain. So I don't know. And I am fascinated by what decisions went into rushing this job. And then also, you know, we have these announcements coming in right and left about season 2 orders over on HBO Max, and still no word. We're almost a month out from the series question finale of And Just Like That, and we don't know about the show's future. And like the head of HBO Max is saying, we want more. And it's like, well, if you want more, make more. Like, so I just don't know. I've been remarkably confused, as I think many of us are.
You know, the way I think a lot of your audience, or at least a lot of the way my audience and the way I was first introduced to you, is you were, I would say, perhaps the greatest Housewives pundit on the block.
Wow.
Where are you, generally speaking, where are you with Housewives presently?
I love that question. It's something I've been pondering lately. I am not feeling the vibe at present, but I'm a big believer in like Housewives. There's like machinations, and I have no doubt I will be like back in when like the right season happens for the right franchise. I just know that like looking at the productions that are currently airing, which is Salt Lake, Miami, and Orange County and Jersey, none of the 4 of them really have me like super duper amped. And in the case of Salt Lake, I just watched the finale yesterday, and I just was like, what are we doing here? Like what's getting us all in this room together? And like, do we even want to be here? And I think that watching Jenny throw the glass on the floor for no reason, that sort of was like, that moment sort of encapsulated so much of how I feel about Salt Lake, but kind of like zooming out Housewives at present moment, which is like, it's kind of like fulfilling the brief at the moment. These women clearly don't like each other, and that can work. Like we've seen women not liking each other being able to work on this show. But I think in the case of like, you know, among the more famous, we don't like each other's, Jill and Bethany, it had the stakes of, well, at one time we did like each other. And I think what the problem with a show like Salt Lake City is, especially in this case of like Meredith and Lisa, who were like told are such great friends, I think we need more of a sense of the foundation in order to watch the house crumble. And I feel like Housewives is really in this zone of like crumbling. And I've always been more of a fan of, I like the antics. I like when everyone's getting along. I'm not really into like the so-and-so hate so-and-so.
Same.
So yeah, I'm not enjoying it. Like if I wasn't enjoying it, I'd stop watching. So at the end of the day, as I might be a little lukewarm about it, but the water's still on.
Evan Ross Katz, you are the executive producer of The Real Housewives of New York. You have to make the decision today for casting for next season. You have to turn it in the next hour. What are you deciding right now?
Okay, so I love
And
this
Alex
question.
McCord is off the table. She's staying in Australia.
I get it. I get it. I had already, I believe it. Although I do think there's a Real Housewives Ultimate Girls Trip that takes us to Australia that casts Alex. Okay, but I am, so I guess I'm gonna keep Ramona, Lou, and Sonia, even though I know that will come with some heat for people for keeping Ramona, but I want to keep Ramona. I want to bring back Jill. I want to bring back Kelly. I want to bring back Dorinda. I want to bring back Heather, and I want to bring back Carol. And so I want a cast of, am I 7 or 8? I think I'm 8. Yeah, I want a cast of 8.
So you're losing Leah McSweeney.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so we're losing Leah, and you're not bringing in any new women?
No, I don't think we need new women. I think that one of the great things about Roni is you have this fabulous pool of women to pull from. I'm even not opposed to bringing back Kristen Takeman, who I think had a great final season on the show. But for me, the most important thing at this point is less cast and more bodies in the room, because I think that we just have been so down as far as bodies. And I think why a lot of people are responding so positively to Real Housewives of Miami is because in addition, there's a cast of 6, but there's 3 friends of, all of whom are like very regular presences. And there's something about having 9 bodies in a room that is so much more electric than Roni, where we left off with 5. And mind you, I think that the 5 of them were particularly low energy because they didn't have high energy to play off of. Like, I think the more, it's like you will kind of rise to the occasion of like what's around you. And so yeah, I love that. And then I also love the idea of bringing Jill and Kelly back together, because the 2 of them are allies. And I think it would be fun to see, because the thing is, if you bring Jill back in silo, the problem is that who is she going to sort of like vibe with? Because her and Ramon, I guess her and Lou, I don't know. I just feel like there's
She's
lots
best
of
friends with
combos. Right. So yes, bring her back. I know Kelly and Lou are close. And I feel like I want to give Ramona, like, it's like keep Ramona on the show, but she needs a competent person to go toe to toe with, or equally as incompetent counterpoint. But yeah, for me, it's like bring back all of the greatest hits, and play them all together. It's like, I just want the old band back. And I know there's several iterations of the old band. And then also too, it's just like, I want the Heather. I love Heather, and I think she was done dirty because of Leah's agenda. And it's like, I want Heather to come back and I want the proper Heather Assance that, Orange County is having. I want New York to have that.
You mentioned the stakes of the Bethany and Jill fight, like we were invested because they were best friends at one time. In hindsight, who won the fight? Jill or Bethany? It's now 2022. Looking back, who really won?
Well, Bethany really won. The issue with that whole fight and why it's so complex and juicy even all these years later is that it's rooted in ego at its core. And it's this idea of like what ego can do to a person and how ego can ultimately drive them to do bad things to those they love in an effort to bolster either their own sense of self or their own sense of self within the world. So I think the issue with that will always go back to the fact that like Jill never had any grounds for her initial argument, on top of the fact that like Bethany is probably not the person you want to like, go toe to toe with. But I felt for Jill because I think she had a moment of realization in which she realized what she'd done. but I think it will always be Bethany. And then also one of the great things about Bethany as a fighter in her early years is that especially I think, going back to all of her arguments with Kelly, is it's that Bethany really never lost her cool. I think Go to Sleep became such an iconic line because it was the first time you'd witnessed Bethany crack. And so I think with the Jill thing on top of all of that is like that Bethany was just so level-headed throughout all of it, never raising her voice, never getting overly emotional. And so, yeah, Bethany's the winner. Now in present day 2022, who is winning at life? I'm putting my money on Jill more than I am Bethany.
For me, Jill won. Jill is winning at life, not Bethany.
Well, yeah, winning at
Jill
life.
Jill has friends and family and relationships and a very full, loving life, where Bethany still seems quite alone in the world. And I know she's engaged, but
Yeah, I mean, Bethany's fascinating. What I want for Bethany is I just want Bethany back on Roni. And I feel like that is where she is best served. And but I also feel like it's like, I tip my hat to Bethany in so many ways, as far as like she's been able to do incredible things, and I don't think that should be overlooked. And so Bethany on Instagram, I fear and fear not in like the exciting, like I'm quaking in my boots over like excitement, but yeah, bring her back. But I don't see that happening yet, so I'm not holding out hope.
She has a new book coming out. It's a business book. Would you take her business advice? Do you think she has good business advice?
Not no. I think that if a person has done a thing successfully, it's worth hearing their how they did it story. My pushback would be, I would much rather like here's how I did it, then here's my advice to you. Because I think when you frame something as advice, it suddenly is like dismissing the fact that, like, for instance, Bethany had a lot going for her in the sense of like the exposure of the Real Housewives, for instance, in terms of building her brand. And those are things that are like not afforded to the average Joe and Joanna that are like creating a business. So again, framework, not my favorite, but do I think there are things that like we can learn from Bethany by way of like creating a successful business? Without question.
You often, your whole Instagram account, it's all about fashion, and you're throwing up, just like your witty commentary on sort of like Timothée Chalamet. And here's my question for you. Billy Eichner's physical transformation. Now, there's been some discourse, because lately he's been, why are you laughing?
No, go ahead.
You're into this. You're into the prompt. Okay. So Billy Eichner's physical transformation. He's lately been posting like shirtless photos of himself, photos at the, outside working out in LA. He drastically changed his appearance. I mean, from everything from hair transplant to, dramatic weight loss and getting into great shape. Now, I have seen some discourse online where in the comments section of those great looking photos of him, people saying, I hate that he had to conform to the Hollywood jacked mask size. What do you think of his transformation?
That's interesting. I think that people that are having that response, I understand the impulse of that response, and I think that there's a lot worth unpacking in that response. It's a very valid reaction. I would say that I'm a big proponent of like everyone's body and their appearance is not really on the table for discussion. That said, when you are a person in Hollywood that sort of, one could argue, comes with the territory, my feeling is that like, and similar conversations have been had about a lot of people outside of just Billy, when you sort of witness this physical transformation or like, the Hollywoodification of people. I always come from the mindset of, if I had that kind of money, I'd be doing the exact same thing. I would get the trainer. I would get the hair plus or whatever. I don't know whatever he's been doing, I would do the same thing and then 10 times more. So as someone who like very much understands the physical pressures, and you know, he is on red carpets at premieres with Beyonce. Like, you know what I mean? It's like there are ways in which he is forced to be a public person, even if he, you know, even if he is not the same sort of celebrity that is, you know, like Orlando Bloom or something. I mean, in many ways, he's doing the exact same thing. He has the same trajectory. So I get it. I get why he's done it. I also understand why people at home that log on and see that, I understand how they might be troubled by it. But I think that the frustration should be targeted more at the system and less at Billy, because I think Billy is adhering to a troubling system that I think many of us, myself included, like I said, would adhere to if given the opportunity. So I think it's a really complex conversation, and I think it's worth having more and in more detail and at a more regular cadence. That's how I feel about it.
You sort of start out the book with the thesis, and I fully agree that the book is not just for people who are obsessed with Buffy. I was not obsessed with Buffy. I'll give you very quickly like my Buffy journey or my experience with it to just sort of like help us relate on the topic. I knew of Buffy because, listen, I've watched all of those compilation videos of like Tara and Willow. Like, I grew up in the age of LiveJournal and fanfic, and that's what was bubbling up around like in the lesbian like fanfic community at the time. And so that was my entry point to like understanding it. I've never watched the series at all. So yes, so that is my experience with Buffy. It's really just through the lens of Tara and Willow, and that, you know, seeing their characters. And I love that you clearly state that this book isn't for Buffy fans. It's for culture vultures, people who love the anthropology of consuming everything about a thing, people who don't just casually like, but love a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like so much of my personality is like, I get really excited about things. And I kind of have a joke now where it's like, I make something my personality. And I think if you follow me on social, you've seen it with Euphoria recently. You probably saw it with The White Lotus. Surely you saw it with And Just Like That. And it all goes back to Sarah Michelle Gellar. That was like the first thing I made my personality into. But it's like, I love discourse, recently the Nicole Kidman Mew Mew miniskirt. Like that's, I just find these subjects and I want to read everything about them. I want to know everyone's opinion. I love, like, you know, part of my journey with Survivor, for instance, which I binged in its full through quarantine, was the ancillary podcast discussing Survivor. I'm just like a big fan of like, I love the sort of like post-mortem of anything. That is like where my happiest place. And also I love the idea of like someone convincing me that something I thought I felt one way about, I actually was misinformed, or just they successfully convinced me to change my own opinion. I always find my opinion really malleable. So culture vulture to me is like, there's that similar person out there who just like, and it's not really so much about like, oh, I stan Britney Spears. That's a little bit different to me. And don't get me wrong, I stan certain celebrities, but it's less about celebrities and more about movies or TV shows or books or magazine publications and whatnot, things that have a legacy to them that is either continuing to evolve, or in the case of Buffy, because Buffy no longer exists, but Buffy's legacy does continue to exist and continues to be warped, for lack of a better word. So I think it's just like, there's that person and I meet them sometimes and it's like, they're, you know, take And Just Like That, for instance. It's like, there's two different kinds of discourse within Just Like That. There are people that sort of like want to talk about it on a very base level, which I'm happy to do. And then there are people who sort of like want to get into some of like the minutia, like what you mentioned with, you know, why not make Nia Wallace queer as well? Great question. That to me is like, yes, let's have that conversation. And so I think I've just always been someone who just like loves looking at every, the everything that was coming out. Sorry about it, just like that with the what should Carrie have called 911 about the Peloton? It's like I love that the entire articles were written about that. Like that to me, that is exactly the kind of pop culture I want to consume. Period.
If you were to explain to a group of people who just landed on Earth today, what is it about Buffy that makes it a show so defining and formative? How would you explain it?
My answer probably won't be as articulate as I'd like it to be, but I feel that for so many of us growing up, and I think this was more the case when I was a kid than it is now, because I think the internet is a more of a connective force, but I grew up without the internet, without being around other gay people, and for a long time knowing that other gay people existed. And there's an outsiderness to my experience that I think is pretty universal, not amongst all people, but amongst many people, of just feeling like their teen years were spent living in hell. And this show sort of came forward and created, embodied that, found a way to make the demons that so many of us grapple with in our formative age to fully realize them. So that's one thing I love about the show. And then on top of that, I just love the character of Buffy so much. I feel like she is such a pillar of strength and shows tremendous ways in which I don't even want to call her weak. That's not the word. She is comfortable with her vulnerabilities and with the ways in which she is not yet strong. And so I love the idea that like, you have this hero, but she's not infallible. And there are things, particularly like human emotions, that get in the way of her wanting to just be this constant pillar of strength. And I think I've always just like, I don't know, the character of Buffy, I've always really revered for her strength, but also those moments in which she's not particularly strong. So yeah, it's the funniest. The costumes are the best. And I think it holds up really, really well. Long-winded, not as articulate as I'd like it to be, but we'll land there one day.
We'll land there. There's also a lot of queer. There are gay characters in the show. We talked about Willow and Tara, but also there's a lot of queer subtext. Like there's the whole thing where Buffy comes out to her mom as a slayer, and the mom is like, "Have you ever tried not being a slayer? Like, are you sure?" And you write about watching that scene and like feeling like sort of like being taken aback, because I mean, was Joss really writing about being gay? Like, was there this queer subtext threaded throughout?
I mean, that's such a good question. I can't answer that because I don't know the answer to that. And honestly, I could see it. I could see both it being intentional and being unintentional, both being true. I feel like again, this goes back to that sort of like strange universality of the otherness, being that like, so I think if I were to guess, again, I'm guessing, I don't think it was on purpose. And I think this is just one of the realities of that experience of otherness ringing true to so many people, particularly for queer people. And what I love about that moment is it's like it's that idea that it's like her mother is not, it's not that her mom is mad that, again, let's take the gay metaphor. It's not that mom and dad are mad that you're gay. It's that they're thinking life is going to be so much harder for you. Have you tried not doing it? Life would be so much easier. And so I think there are a number of moments kind of like that and the otherness of it all. But I mean, I don't think it was intention, but I could see a world in which it's like, Joss speaks about the fact that Willow and Tara were based off of a gay couple that he knew. So he had gay people in his orbit. And so it quite possibly could have been, but I do know, I mean, I remember that scene, and it's funny now because when I watch it, I'm like, it feels so queer coded that it's like, there's no way this isn't. And yet I do think there's a world in which it isn't. It's just, we're picking up something different than what was being put down.
Somebody in the cast gave you Joss Whedon's personal email, and you print your email to him requesting an interview, basically saying, I'm doing this book, because you've already interviewed, tons of the cast. and you literally print the email in the book and you say no response. Now, my question is, if he had responded, what would have been the core that you wanted to get to with him? If you were given an hour with him, or if he gave you 30 minutes, what is it that you would want to get to with him?
It's a great question. So I would say this: I am very interested in talking with him. I think that my interest in talking with him does not preclude the fact that I listened to all of the allegations that were given directly to me and those that I read. It would not be a matter of dismissing anything that's been said to me, both publicly and in confidence. All of that said, I think there's validity in talking to this man about this show. And I think there are certain aspects of the show that, because I could see a world in which he agreed to the interview with no questions about any of the allegations that have come forward. I still think there are ways to get at some of what I think I'm trying to get at with this book, and sort of expressing that, like, there's a lot about who this person is that seeped its way into this show. I mean, Joss has said publicly for many years that the character of Xander is kind of based off of his own experience of kind of being the outcast in high school. But for instance, I would want to talk about season 6, when the character of Spike sexually assaults, or attempts to sexually assault, Buffy. And I would love, especially in light of everything that has been reported about, or rather everything that has been alleged about him, I would love to ask him about that decision and where that impulse came in the writer's room, and if he has any regrets about it. And, I talk in the book, Amber Benson reveals in the book about how there were negotiations that were underway for her to come back in season 7, for her in some way to bring the character of Tara back, that didn't end up happening. And I would love to hear from his perspective why those sort of negotiations ended up breaking down. So I think there are some specific beats I'd love to chat with him about within the world of the show that I still think would be able to inform us about who this man is.
One of the initial thing that drew me like immediately into the book was how you literally open this entire tome drawing a parallel to Rent, like the cult following that Buffy has, liking it to Rent heads, of which I saw Rent on Broadway like at least 15 times. I would second act it, which I'm sure you know what that means. In the sense that it was bigger than a Broadway show. Like, Rent became a lifestyle. Can you like sort of expand on that? And why did you choose? Like, is this something that you always like have been thinking about, sort of the parallels between Rent and Buffy? And why did you decide, like, let me open it with this sort of little intro on Rent?
I think for me, one thing that I had grappled with after the allegations came out was this idea of how much does Joss Whedon own of Buffy, right? Like, he not only created the show, he also created this character, and this character and the show are held up as this sort of like feminist masterpiece. And obviously that does not sync up with this man that has been described by all of these people, who this man is. So I just began sort of grappling with like the who owns Buffy of it all. And it got me thinking about Rent, because I had read that story and kind of heard the fact that Rent was sort of taken from this woman, and sort of Jonathan Larson came forward and presented it as his own, which is not a parallel to Buffy, right? Like, Joss wrote Buffy. He didn't steal Buffy from anyone, to the best of our knowledge, but I thought what the stories could potentially share in common was that idea around ownership. And so, unless you read Marcia Schulman's writings, you would not know. Most people think Rent is Jonathan Larson's story. Also, it should be noted, Rent maybe is Jonathan Larson's story. This was never we don't know for certain. But one thing that I found in sort of making that comparison was this idea that I think one thing that I landed on for my own sort of thinking is that, like, Joss does not own Buffy. Joss created Buffy, and Buffy is no longer his. That's sort of where I landed. And so for me, it was just sort of seeing that parallel of like, are we able to sort of take away the creator? The answer I found is no, you cannot take away the creator, because they created it, and you can relinquish the legacy. And that's sort of what I wanted to expound upon.
Were you a big Rent fan? Like, what did Rent mean to you?
I loved Rent. I don't think Rent holds up very well, but I feel that way about a lot of things that I used to love.
Hmm.
Um, it's yeah, so it's like with me with Rent, it's like 50% of Rent is outstanding and 50% is so bad that it really drags it down. And also, I would say the characters of Rent are so underbaked that I don't think it ultimately is a legacy musical. So it's funny. It's funny. I was just talking to a friend about wait, what musical? Oh, wait, we were talking about Parade, the Jason Robert Brown musical,
Yes.
and the fact that like the characters in Parade all you just there's so many characters that feel really developed and have wants and needs. Whereas like with
Hmm.
Rent, it's just kind of like I don't know what anyone's really doing here. That said, iconic for its time, blah blah blah. Anyway, I did love Rent. I saw it on Broadway multiple times. I would say Spring Awakening is more like my Rent. I think
Mm.
both generationally, and then also I just like resonated for me more. But I do also have great respect for the legacy of Rent and for what it did for a generation of theater makers and theater goers. So I am ultimately thumbs up with Rent, but I do have a list of bulleted notes.
Now, you dedicate the book to your boyfriend Billy Jacobson, who is not only a developer at Google, but he also has a drag persona called Analytical, where he teaches people to code in drag. When did he start doing this? I mean, I just have so many questions about this. Like, when did he? It's like here are the questions. How did you guys meet? How long have you been together? Were you with him when he started doing drag? Let's just start there. Like, I want to know everything.
So we met on Grinder in 2018. I was working for a website called Mike.com at the time, doing a lot of on-camera interviews with Drag Race talent. Billy was beginning his drag journey and had seen my videos on Mike.com. So messaged me on Grinder because he recognized me. I was immediately taken because he's very handsome and he is very tall and he's Jewish, which are two attributes that I find very attractive in a partner. We met and very quickly fell into the cadence of our love story. But I would say the drag, he had begun doing drag again prior to us meeting, but it was kind of
Mm.
new to him. But the development of Analytical, I've sort of,
I think it's
who's to
Bore
say?
Witness.
Bore Witness. There you go.
Yeah.
So neither of the ones I suggested. Yeah, you're right. It is Bore Witness. I bore witness to that. I've kind of watched it grow and grow, and I've watched him develop this fandom around it and his own excitement at it. What's particularly I think inspiring about Billy with regards to the drag is like how much he enjoys the process. I feel like there are a
Mhm.
lot of and this is not just drag queens, but there are a lot of people out there that go into a lot of endeavors these days, and the sort of like end point is fame or the desire for exposure. And I think with Billy, he is like really process oriented and not just in teaching people code, which is something he feels extremely is the thing he beats his drum about the most. And basically, his sort of intention is that there are not enough LGBTQ plus people in the world of coding. And if there were more, that there are ways in which things like, for instance, when you fill out a form and it says male or female, and it does not give any space for gender nonconforming individuals, it's stuff like that that
Mhm.
can be affected by through coding. But he also it's like the styling of the wigs and
Mhm.
the making of the outfits. I mean, Billy has taught himself how to sew. He has taught
Wow.
himself how to style wigs, how to create like nail gloves. I mean, like he's constantly very tactile in his approach to drag because, coding is a digital medium. It all takes place on the computer. So, all this to say, I really am enamored by Billy's sort of interest in the art form and then dedication to it. I mean, like it's quite remarkable. And then watching him sort of like, I don't even have TikTok and he's TikTok famous. And I love getting to be obviously his boyfriend, but I like being able to be a fan and like sort of watch his evolution grow and by proxy his own self-confidence.
And I guess the question is, was he a Buffy fan before he met you, or did you introduce him to it?
Okay, so no, he had never seen Buffy, and we are up to season 6, episode 17. Yeah, 17. We just finished a couple nights ago, normal again. So the goal was for him to have finished the book before, excuse me, to have finished the series before I submitted the book. We did not meet that.
Mm-hmm.
Now our goal is going to be is he going to finish the book by the time is he going to finish the series by the time the book comes out? I don't see that happening. What happened for us was I really do not like season 6 of Buffy, even more so than I say in the book. And we got to like that midpoint of season 6 where it became so hard to motivate to watch it when there's so many other things that we enjoy watching.
Mm-hmm.
We are through that hump now, and I'm confident that we can like get back to like a better place with the show, but that sort of bogged us down. So he has now watched it, I would say 4/5 of it at this point, we could say, and he will finish it soon.
And what's his review?
I think really, really likes it. I think he really loves the character of Willow because I think he relates to sort of like the nerdy aspects of Willow.
Mm-hmm.
Much, I think they share a lot in common. And I think that like Billy loves a thing that I love. Like it makes him happy to share a thing that I love, just as he shared something like Avatar: The Last Airbender with me. So I don't know if I really have a sense of like Billy's feelings on Buffy beyond me, but I don't know if I necessarily want to know because I wouldn't want to be partnered with someone that doesn't love Buffy. So better to live in ignorance. Not that I think he wouldn't like it, but like, why get a confirmation?
And if somebody like, okay, me, I'm a perfect example. Where should I begin? Like, do I have to start at the beginning? Like, I know you say season 3 is the best season, but do you really have to watch it chronologically?
No, you don't have to. Well, no, you don't have to watch it chronologically. I mean, I would say if there's lots of different versions you could do. It's like you can do like the 10 best episodes and just watch those. I mean, there's going to obviously be missing context. I would say I think you should watch the show from the very beginning. I think Buffy is good from the beginning, and I think unlike so many pilots, Buffy knew what it wanted to be from the outset. I'd say one detail that I think is really important is that like Buffy begins the series already as the Slayer and already retired. And I think a detail like that is so important because on so many shows, the pilot episode is the person discovering the thing, right? It's like, for instance, I think about like Friends, and it's like it starts off, Rachel's been canceled her wedding. I don't know if he left her at the altar. I can't remember, but like she comes to Central Perk in the wedding dress, sees Monica for the first time since I think college or whatever, and thus begins their becoming roommates and the show begins. And with a show like Buffy, I like the fact that it's kind of like there's a been there, done that from the outset. So we kind of are able to move past a lot of like the exposition. But season 2, episode 3 is when the show fully takes off. But I think there's a lot before that that is valid. And also, I'm a completist by nature.
Yeah.
So it's funny because people with my Survivor journey, people will be like, I'm starting with season 7. I just watched Heroes versus Villains season 20. And I'm like, you are fucking crazy. So I will always go back to the beginning. But I think in the case of Buffy, if it was a truly flop season 1, I'd be like, skip it. That said, Sarah Michelle Gellar will tell you to skip season 1. So maybe I'm in the wrong.
Wow. Really? You know, the survivor of it all. Now, I know that you just had Jerry Manthe on your show, and I actually interviewed her for this show like about a year ago, and we became really good friends. I spent 2 nights at her house in Napa in May with her.
Wow. Shaking.
I was shaking.
Cultural icon.
Icon.
And I would say it's funny. It's like, and you also had Rosie on, who is another example of someone from that time where it's like, it's funny how dismissive people are of so many people from the past. And it's crazy to me that even in the pantheon of great Survivor players, Jerry's name is not one that is often mentioned. And part of the goal with Drop Your Buffs was, I mean, just putting respect, and often it's women who are not regarded as highly as they should be. But Jerry, no one more so than Jerry, but like one of the thrills of the Survivor podcast is being able to have someone on like Jerry and like just shower her with adoration and have her be so caught off guard by it, because the Survivorverse is predominantly straight men who not holistically, but often do not give, you know, enough regard to players like Jerry, who both me and my co-host see as the icon. So
Jerry Manthe was formative to me in my sexual awakening in a way, or she's like one of the tenets of my, I mean, Jerry Manthe, like she was like dream guest on my podcast. And this is not a Survivor podcast, obviously. This is just like, I mean, I guess it pretends to be a Bravo podcast, but obviously it's not. But like my secret like dream was like Jerry Manthe, like I would die.
Because with the case of Survivor, it's like we can talk about strategy and gameplay and things that you thought would go one way that didn't. Whereas like with Housewives, it's pretty much like what you see is what you get, and what you don't see is probably not allowed to be discussed by them. Right. You know what I mean?
Well, there's an intelligence to Survivor where there's no intelligence really to Housewives.
Concur. So I really enjoy, I think there's a lot to dissect about Survivor, and I find it to be like, so I really, it's like, I love a Housewives podcast, don't get me wrong, and I do enjoy this sort of like, you know, the postmortem, but I feel like in the case of Survivor, it's like, the interviews with past contestants about current seasons, or like getting one of like the origin of an archetype to weigh in on the present iteration of said archetype. I mean, there's so much. I mean, when you have, you know, 42 casts at this point, there's a lot to like deep dive on. And as a historian by nature, it's just, you know, such ripe territory.
I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much. This was a blast. I love you.
My pleasure. I really want to just shout out your interview with Rosie, which I thought was just so fantastic. I loved how you came in so prepared. And I feel like with Rosie, she's a tough interview. She's tough to win over. And you were like very masterful throughout it. And I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. I mean, okay, give the name of the book, where everybody can get it. Pre-orders are very important. Say everything you need to say.
The book is called Into Every Generation, A Slayer is Born, How Buffy Staked Our Hearts, which is funny because staked our hearts, to have a stake in your heart's actually a bad thing. But we kind of get into that in the book. It is available for pre-order now. You can go to my Instagram, instagram.com. I don't know, just at Evan Ross Katz
www.
on Instagram. Yeah. And I have a pre-order link in my bio, but if you search Into Every Generation, A Slayer is Born, you'll get all of that stuff.